One of the questions that I had while watching House of the Dragon Season 2 finale was how exactly did Helena end up in Daemon's Weirwood vision? This was something that I was also asked down in the comments of a recent video, and having rewatched the scene a few times and thought about it a little bit, I think I have a couple of answers. So today we're going to talk about what I think the most likely options are, as well as go on a few related tangents and talk a little bit about the interconnectedness of magic in George R. R. Martin's universe, but with a focus on Helena and how exactly she was able to communicate with Daemon. This is one of those things where there's two potential answers, and one of them I think is a little bit more likely than the other, but both of them are pretty cool. So we'll get to some book quotes in a minute to give some context to what just happened there, but the first thing that I want to point out is that rewatching the scene, I'm becoming more confident that this wasn't just a vision of Helena. This was actually Helena herself physically projecting her way into Daemon's vision and trying to communicate with him. When Daemon first sees her, he's clearly in vision mode, so if this was all it would make sense that this was just a vision appearance of Helena for some reason. But then when he gets out of vision mode and it cuts back to him staring at the weirwood, he can still hear her voice. And then it cuts to Helena, who is standing out there staring at the night sky on the balcony, and she closes her mouth like she's just finished speaking, after Daemon had just finished hearing her voice. All of this combined with the fact that she is wearing the same clothes in the vision as she is in real life at that exact moment, I think we are definitely meant to believe this is Helena actually projecting herself out there in some magical way and visiting and talking to Daemon. And it really does make sense because right after this, she also tries on some level or another to give a prophetic warning to Aemon. So she's kind of reaching out to both of these hot headed counterparts on each side of the war and trying to warn them about their fate. So the question we're left with is if Helena is projecting herself out there somehow, how exactly is she doing this? If she was standing in front of the Weirwood, it would all be very easy. She was just using the Weirwood magic, the same thing that Daemon is grabbing onto, and then it would make complete sense that she's appearing in Daemon's vision. And they did put a Weirwood in King's Landing, so they could have used it and she could have been standing out there in front of the Weirwood. But she wasn't. She was staring out at the night sky, up at the moon and the stars. So why is that? Well, it turns out there's a chance that staring up at the moon and the stars may work just as well as staring into a weirwood. I want to take a look at some examples from the books here just to give a bit of context to what I'm talking about. So there are actually two very helpful examples that we can look at to understand what's going on here at the beginning and the end of A Dance with Dragons. We're going to start with the end because to go forward you must go back and all of that good stuff, and of course, yes, we are talking about Quaithe, who appears to reach out to Daenerys in her final chapter of A Dance with Dragons, using the moon and the stars in a similar way to what Helena may have just been doing. Off in the distance a wolf howled. The sound made her feel sad and lonely, but no less hungry. As the moon rose above the grassland, Dany slipped at last into a restless sleep. She dreamed. All of her cares fell away from her, and all her pains as well, and she seemed to float upward into the sky. She was flying once again, spinning, laughing, dancing, as the stars wheeled around her and whispered secrets in her ear. To go north, you must journey south. To reach the west, you must go east. To go forward, you must go back. To touch the light, you must pass beneath the shadow. Quaithe? Dany called. Where are you, Quaithe? Then she saw. Her mask is made of starlight. Remember who you are, Daenerys, the stars whispered in a woman's voice. The dragons know. Do you? So, as we see here, Quaithe is able to appear to Daenerys and speak to her in a sort of similar way to Helena speaking to Daemon. And Quaithe has appeared many other times to Daenerys at night, and appearing sort of just like a shadow cast by the moonlight, and then when Daenerys goes to look for her further, she's not actually there. All of this points to the idea of some ability to project yourself or your form or communicate in some way using the stars or the moon. And I think the idea of like reflecting your magical energy off of the moon to sort of connect with another person who's far away is something that I think makes a lot of sense magically, and it might be what George is going for here. The example we're going to take a look at in a minute comes from a Jon chapter, and the wolves howling at the moon feature heavily in that as well, so keep in mind when that is being read later on, that George begins this passage where Dany has a vision of Quaithe with a wolf howling at the rising moon. so the vision doesn't come until the moon has come up. It's a bunch of ways like this that the moon and stars are used in the passages that we've already talked about or will talk about that make me think it's fairly likely that Helena may be using the moon and the stars to project her form here. But I did say there were two possible options here that both kinda made sense. The other option is actually a way that many people speculate Quaithe is reaching out to Daenerys, potentially using a glass candle. She does warn Daenerys in one of these appearances that the glass candles are burning, and glass candles can supposedly be used to communicate with people who are far away and send dreams and visions. So we've seen Quaithe appear as like a shadow cast somewhat by the moonlight or as the stars, but it is very possible she's using a glass candle to do this. So are glass candles in some way connected to the moon and the stars? I don't know. Are they both able to be used in a similar way, right? Like, I think that glass candles in a lot of ways mirror the uses that the Weirwoods have. You can use the Weirwoods to send dreams, you can use the glass candles to send dreams. We've seen green seer bodies who are strapped up to the Weirwoods and seemingly immortal because of their connection to the Weirwoods. And in one of the unused prologue versions that George has in the Cushing Library that was found by G-Steph, one of the things that he says about glass candles is that you could bind yourself to a glass candle and you would be immortal so long as the flame lasts. He even said that the flame would occasionally need to be renewed with blood. So on the fiery side, you have a glass candle which can send people dreams, and you can bind yourself to it, and it can grant you eternal life, and you just need to constantly feed it blood. And on the icy side, you have these trees that can send people dreams, you can bind yourself to them, you can get eternal life, and the old ways are built around constantly making sure that the trees are fed blood. This is all stuff I talk about a lot if you're new here, so you've got a lot of cool stuff to catch up on, but basically you see the point. The glass candles and the weirwoods are mirrored, but magically they're doing a lot of the same stuff. They're just a different vessel to get to the same magical end, basically. So, if the ice and fire versions of these things exist, it would maybe make sense if there are a starry, magical, celestial religion somewhere out there. You could have a similar way to get to the same result using the stars or the moon. Well, when you take a look at the world building, you have the Church of Starry Wisdom in Essos, and you also have the Moon Singers. So you have these two religions who are popular in Essos that actually are based around the stars and the moon. The Moon Singers themselves are so popular that they actually have a big temple in Bravos. Miri Mazdur even brags that she learned birthing songs from the Moon Singers. And then when Dany is burning her alive, she is singing as Daenerys' dragons are born from the fire. So it could have literally been Moonsinger magic birthing songs that gave birth to Daenerys' dragons. This is kind of just how George does his like connect the dots world building, right? Like Miri Mazdur says she learns birthing songs from the Moonsingers. Then later on we see her singing as the dragons are born. And then George also has us hear a Dothraki legend about how dragons were born from the moon. And then just to top it all off, in the House of the Undying, Daenerys sees Mirri Maz Duur in the flames, and as she's shrieking, a dragon is bursting from her brow. This is sort of saying that something Mirri was doing, or Mirri's consciousness directly, potentially even, was going into birthing the dragons. All of these little connect the dots, though, do on some level or another connect the magic of the Moonsingers potentially to the birth of Daenerys' dragons, and I think make a pretty good case that these star and moon based religions probably have some power as well. So again, that combined with the fact that Helena was staring up at the stars and the moon, makes me think that that's probably what she was using to sort of project herself into Daemon's vision. We will talk more about this and get to the example of the moon talking to Jon that I mentioned earlier, but I do just want to talk a little bit more about the idea of Helena having a glass candle just because I do think it is also pretty fun. And as I said, I think this is the other potentially plausible option. I lean towards the idea of using the stars and the moon, as I said, because she was literally staring at them and we've never seen her using a glass candle on screen. But if you want to make your arguments down in the comments for why it could still be a glass candle, I am definitely here for it. I would say there's probably a 60 or 70% chance that it's going to turn out she was using the moon and the stars when it's all said and done and we like calculate up all of the evidence, and like a 30-40% chance that in later seasons we get some evidence that yes, Helena actually has a glass candle. One thing I've brought up a few times in previous videos is just how much sense it would make for there to be one or even many glass candles somewhere deep down in the Red Keep. They were old fire magic instruments, and the Targaryens are a surviving family from Valyria who fled with a bunch of their possessions. And also, there's an order of pyromancers who are trying to keep these old fire magic ways alive, and so the Targaryens and the pyromancers both residing at the Red Keep makes it pretty likely to me that somewhere, some way in the Red Keep, there is at least one or a few glass candles. One of those two parties was sure to bring some from Valyria, either when the Targaryens fled to Dragonstone originally, or as like the pyromancers were fleeing during the Doom. If a glass candle was going to survive anywhere in the world, the Red Keep is probably one of the most likely places, and we know there are a few out there, so just on many different levels, I think it makes sense if George revealed later on that there, yes, is some glass candles down in the Red Keep somewhere. So, with that established, a glass candle would sort of explain a lot of things that are going on with Helena. When she turns to Aemond and says, I saw it, where is she seeing these things? Are they all just in her dreams, or is she able to look through a glass candle? As I said, she's been set up as a dreamer. We haven't seen her using a glass candle, so I don't think she's connected to a glass candle or using one in any way. But if it was something that came up in a later season, that would be something that this could all just be foreshadowing for. How would you feel if we got a scene later on where we find Helena like alone deep down in the Red Keep somewhere and she's just like staring at this glass candle? Or potentially, even if you wanted to take it further, you find out that when Helena was young, maybe she found a glass candle and loved to just spend hours and hours staring into it, and perhaps that's partially why she ended up the way that she is, where she's kind of just like outside of time and has all of this crazy information, and it's just made her like disconnected from everything. I don't personally think that that's the route they're going to go, but it could potentially be interesting. Again, let me know what you think about all of that down in the comments. As I said, it's definitely a plausible option, but I lean towards the idea of, again, using the moon and the stars. Another reason, besides just all of the Quaithe stuff, that I do sort of think the moon and the stars have this ability in the books as well to communicate with people, is sort of how many times the moon and the Weirwoods are connected. And there are a lot of weird little sort of examples that we're going to get into. We're going to start, though, with, as I said, the beginning of A Dance with Dragons. Danny ends the book in a dream being talked to by the stars, and Jon begins the book in a dream being talked to by the moon. Here are the very first lines of Jon 1, A Dance with Dragons. The white wolf raced through a black wood, beneath a pale cliff as tall as the sky. The moon ran with him, slipping through a tangle of bare branches overhead, across the starry sky. Snow, the moon murmured. The wolf made no answer. Snow crunched beneath his paws. The wind sighed through the trees. Far off he could hear his packmates calling to him, like to like. They were hunting too. A wild rain lashed down upon his black brother as he tore at the flesh of an enormous goat, washing the blood from his side, where the goat's long horn had raked him. In another place his little sister lifted her head to sing to the moon, and 100 small gray cousins broke off their hunt to sing with her. The hills were warmer where they were, and full of food. Many a night his sister's pack gorged on the flesh of sheep and cows and horses, the prey of men, and sometimes even on the flesh of man himself. Snow, the moon called down again, cackling. The white wolf padded along the man trail beneath the icy cliff. The taste of blood was on his tongue, and his ears rang to the song of the 100 cousins. Once they had been 6, 5 whimpering blind in the snow beside their dead mother, sucking cool milk from her hard dead nipples, whilst he crawled off alone. 4 remained, and one the white wolf could no longer sense. Snow, the moon insisted. The white wolf ran from it, racing toward the cave of night, where the sun had hidden, his breath frosting in the air. On the starless nights, the great cliff was as black as stone, a darkness towering high above the wide world. But when the moon came out, it shimmered pale and icy as a frozen stream. The wolf's pelt was thick and shaggy, but when the wind blew along the ice, no fur could keep the chill out. On the other side, the wind was colder still, the wolf sensed. That was where his brother was, the gray brother who smelled of summer. Snow! An icicle tumbled from a branch. The white wolf turned and bared his teeth. Snow! His fur rose bristling as the woods dissolved around him. Snow! 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 He heard the beat of wings. Through the gloom a raven flew. It landed on Jon Snow's chest with a thump, and a scrabbling of claws. "Snow!" it screamed to his face. And so Jon wakes up, woken by the raven screaming his name. So obviously it's interesting that we have the moon calling out to Jon Snow in his dream like this. And when he is in his dream, he seems to be actually living out in ghosts. So this isn't like a normal dream, this is a wolf dream, and the moon is speaking to him. Then when Jon wakes up, it's the raven that's speaking to him, which is pretty interesting because many people speculate that the raven is warged by Bloodraven or future Bran, whoever the three-eyed crow is. Whoever it is that's living inside of this raven is clearly some sort of old godsy mentor figure for Jon because they helped Jon win the Lord Commander election, and they seem to just be helping look out for Jon in general. So we get this sort of magical mentor figure reaching out to Jon through the moon, and Quaithe, who is Dany's magical mentor figure, is also reaching out to her through the stars. Also, before we get too far away from Jon's wolf dream that I just read, I'd be interested to see some discussion down in the comments. Do you guys think that George is actually using the moon in sort of a way of like, that's the psychic connection point that is able to bind these wolves and their magic, right? Because there's the whole idea of wolves howling at the moon, and it's kind of interesting that George seems to like subtly be playing off of that. Like he can hear his brothers and sisters howling at the moon, it's almost like they're howling at the moon because the moon is like the connecting point between them and all of their psychic magical wolf family. I'm not really sure if that's exactly what he's going for, but I'd be interested to hear if you guys think maybe it is. Let's also remember that the vision of Quaithe that Daenerys has happens right after the moon comes up and Daenerys notices it and hears a wolf howling at the moon. Maybe that's just George's way of showing that it's nighttime, but again, maybe there is something deeper going on here with the moon and this sort of magical communication ability. I think that's a really cool idea, and given all of the times that the Weirwoods and the moon seem to be connected in some way or another, I think it makes a lot of sense. The warging magic is definitely connected to the Weirwoods, and if the Weirwoods are connected to the moon being sort of like a nexus point for the magical communication does sort of make a lot of sense. And just to give a few more examples of what I mean by the moon being connected to the Weirwoods, in Bran's like giant Weirwood training montage that he gets in Bran 3 A Dance with Dragons, time is constantly being kept by the moon. George will basically constantly reference the moon and then have something happen, then reference the moon, then have something happen. In a previous video, I've compared it to an 80s training montage. It's got that sort of style. You can imagine like the days and nights coming and going as Bran is like leveling up his powers, and it's the Weirwoods that Bran is learning from, and it's the moon that is constantly keeping the pace. In addition to this, the Weirwoods and the moon are color matched as well. It's constantly said that the Weirwoods are the color of moonlight, or that moonlight is painting the Weirwoods, and when Bran finds the Black Gate down in the well at the Night Fort, it's described as glowing like moonlight. Also, just a little bit before this, Bran sees the weirwood that is sprouting up from near the well, and he says that its branches are reaching up as though they are trying to grab the moon and pull it down into the well. So this is probably some of the strongest symbolism that George has given us, connecting the tree and the moon. It's also worth noting that the first time we see the others, they are described as pale white shadows, and they're written off at first when he gets his first little glimpse of them because he thinks it's just some trick of the moonlight. When the other is actually out in the clearing and he can fully see it, its flesh is described as the color of milk, which is something else that is color matched to the weirwoods and the moon. George will often describe something as the color of milk and moonlight. So these are things that are connected on some level. And then the patterns on the other's armor are described as running like moonlight on water. So this is multiple times now in just the introduction of the others where the moonlight is connected with the others. And the others are very likely connected with the Weirwood, so it's all sort of a giant big system. If all magic is sort of one connected system in this sort of way with the Weirwoods and the moon and the others, it's actually pretty interesting because the dragons are also said to have come from the moon. Or a second moon in the sky which got too close to the sun and broke apart and all of the dragons poured forth. I've talked in the past about how all of these branches of magic seem like they are connected in George's world, and there's some sort of system going on where it's either two halves of the same coin with like the ice and fire, the moon and the stars, the weirwoods and the glass candles, whatever you want to say, right? Or perhaps, as I said, all of these things are just tapping into the exact same magical power in the end, which would be pretty interesting, right? Like, what do you do on a spiritual level when there are multiple gods showing up, and they're all basically claiming to be the true god, and they're all basically doing the same exact magical things, all tapping into the same source of magical power? What do you do with that? I mean, that's a kind of an interesting question, but we don't have time for it in this video. The point is, though, I think in the books we're starting to get enough evidence building up to say that these things may be connected. The fact that Helena is able to apparently be staring out at the moon or the stars and use that to in some way or another project herself into Daemon's Weirwood vision is probably some more good evidence that these things are connected in some way or another. Whether you're getting there by ice or by fire, by the tree or by the moon, you are getting to the same sort of enlightenment in the end. The same sort of astral plane or whatever you want to call it. I suppose the correct in-world term would probably be the green sea, and potentially, considering Daemon has now completed his sort of vision quest that he seems to have been on at Harrenhal, and Helena talks to him after he seems to have had his final vision there, perhaps this is like welcoming him into enlightenment. She's like the other family member who's sailing the green sea there, who has seen all of this sort of stuff and is magically enlightened as well, and she sees Daemon pop up and is like, "Oh hey, welcome to whatever this is." And that's their first sort of little magical communication because Daemon has now fully leveled up and reached whatever sort of magical enlightenment is required to sail the Green Sea. If you view his sort of arc as somewhat of a magical initiation, which he did start by drinking a potion, sort of like Bran did, and he's having a bunch of magical Weirwood visions, sort of like Bran did. Maybe at the end of his initiation there will be some sort of similar result for Bran, we don't know. But basically, you could view all of what Daemon's been doing as this big magical training initiation, and this can sort of be his graduation when he's finally able to communicate with someone like Helena, who very clearly has her magical powers more leveled up. They are family after all, and it's very similar to how the familial connection is the magic that is on some level connecting Jon through his wolf dreams to the rest of his siblings. Basically, all of the Stark siblings have a very high level of magic within them, whether they know it or not, and whether they're consciously doing it or not. But Daemon and Helena now seem to both have their magic leveled up beyond the normal level as well, and so it would make sense if they've developed a similar magical connection, potentially, as we talked about earlier, using the moon, which, again, Helena was out there staring at while Daemon was staring at the Weirwood. So, in general, I think that's what's going on. It's all a big interconnected magical system, and there are many different ways that many different branches of magic can achieve similar magical results. So, the moon and the stars and the trees and these glass candles and all sorts of other instruments can be used to send dreams and visions. There are many different ways that this can be done, and I think we might have just seen the connection between two of them with Damon and Helena. I think that's pretty interesting. Now, I do have one more piece of evidence that I think is relevant to this whole connection that I've been talking about, but it does contain spoilers for the game Elden Ring, which is something that George R. R. Martin did a lot of the world building for. If you don't want spoilers for Elden Ring at all, well, this is where you gotta go, but make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on your way out. So, the piece of evidence that I really think brings this sort of Weirwood and Moon connection together is something that happens at the very end of the game Elden Ring. I actually have a whole video making a bunch of connections between Elden Ring and Dream of Spring that I could see, and that'll be one of the end cards here at the end of this video. So if you want a longer version of what I'm about to talk about, that's where you can go. But just for those of you who aren't aware, in Elden Ring there's something called the Erd Tree, which is a giant world tree that is magical and seems to be interconnected with a bunch of other trees and uses a bunch of magical powers and things like that. It's basically the Weirwoods. There are even dead people down in the roots, and it seems to take in death as a sort of magical energy. It's all the same sort of stuff as the Weirwoods, just in a different form. So, this magical Erd tree, which is basically just the Weirwoods, is very central to the world building of Elden Ring in a similar way to the Weirwoods being central in A Song of Ice and Fire. When you get further along in the game, one of the things that you need to do is burn the Erd tree with a magical fire. This essentially seems to allow for a changing of the age to take place and a new magical power to replace the Erd tree. At least as far as I can tell, that's what seems to be going on in the different endings that I'm aware of. If anyone has any corrections down in the comments, you can probably believe them. I'm not an Elden Ring lore expert, but I am aware of it because it connects very well to A Song of Ice and Fire. The point of all of that, though, is that there's a character called Ranni the Witch who has a lot of parallels to Melisandre and also has a lot of parallels to the Night's Queen. If you side with her, the thing that she replaces the Erd tree with is actually the moon. It is a magical moon that had been hidden by shadow, a second moon in the sky, essentially like the one that supposedly was broken open to create the dragons, sort of hinting at this idea of a yin yang between this world tree and the moon, or potentially the world tree and two moons. Something sort of like that seems to be hinted at with Elden Ring, and it is also seemingly hinted at in like the very ancient history of A Song of Ice and Fire. When you actually complete the game with Ronnie's ending and she wins and gets her thing that she wants, she says, "Now cometh the age of the stars, 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon." So, in replacing the world tree, she is essentially replacing it with the moon, and the moon and the stars seem to be able to fill a similar magical role to whatever the Erd tree was doing in the previous age. So in Elden Ring, there used to be another moon in the sky, but that moon was covered up, and then they were in the age of this magical world tree. And then when the magical world tree was destroyed, the moon became uncovered and was able to fill the same magical role. In A Song of Ice and Fire, there was apparently two moons in the sky, but one of them is gone now, and they are in an age controlled by a giant magical world tree. I don't know if by the end the Weirwood trees will be burned and there will be a second moon in the sky. I'm not saying it's going to work exactly like Elden Ring, but I do think on some level or another, these connections between the moon and the trees and the stars and all of this cosmic magic is something that George is playing with in both of these universes in a very similar way. The fact that we just saw Helena using the stars or the moon to reach out and talk to Daemon, who was using a Weirwood, is just another sign, I think, that these things are interconnected in Westeros. I think that is pretty cool, but I'd love to know what you all think of it down in the comments. If you think so as well, make sure to like and subscribe, and definitely send this video to any of your friends who also watch House of the Dragon that were maybe confused about just how Helena got into that vision. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with something else very soon.